Now, as you probably heard, not long ago some rumors surfaced that Lucasfilm was on the hunt to cast a 40 to 50-year-old actress for Episode 9 to play a character at least codenamed Mara. And of course, as fans of the old expanded universe know, and probably just most fans in general, Mara Jade in the old canon was once a hand of the Emperor's that went on to become a Jedi and Luke Skywalker's wife, and together they would have a child named Ben. Anyway, as interesting as these rumors are, and as amazing as what it could all mean for Episode 9, and I'll give some fun speculation on that in a moment, to be honest, there are a lot of issues with this news that immediately come to mind, not the least of which is that it slipped out in the first place, or that if they really are looking to cast someone to play Mara Jade, that they actually used the name Mara in the casting call, or however else this information slipped out. I mean, if you're going to bring Mara Jade of all characters into Episode 9, who again was Luke's wife in the old expanded universe, you're likely going to use some type of codename to keep this potential huge revelation a secret the best you can. So the most logical conclusion here, assuming that this is true in the first place, is that Mara is simply a codename for a different character. Though, if that is the case, why you'd use the name Mara as that codename is beyond me unless you wanted it to leak to generate buzz amongst the crowd of fans that are probably most likely to be disappointed with the new iteration of Star Wars right now. Those who were huge fans of the old expanded universe, of course. So yes, right out of the box here, there are a lot of problems with this news. But for the sake of argument here, let's just say they really are casting either a character that will be named Mara or a character similar to Mara Jade, hence maybe the reason why they use the code name, who was perhaps either a love interest or wife of Luke Skywalker's at some point, and will play some type of role in Episode 9. Now, I think everyone's immediate first thought is that this would mean that Rey would somehow be the daughter of Luke and Mara Jade, or this Mara Jade-like character, and I don't think that'd be the case. It's not to say J.J. Abrams won't play around with Rey's origin in some respect in Episode 9, because as I've pointed out before, even if Rey's parents were deadbeats, it doesn't necessarily mean what she thought were her parents hadn't adopted her, or been given her, or found her somehow, which might explain why they so easily gave her up for drinking money. It also doesn't mean her grandparents or someone further down the line, and not her parents per se, weren't the significant ones. But for this theory, and keep in mind this is just a fun theory, let's say they won't be changing Rey's lineage to make her the daughter of Luke, so how then could Mara Jade fit into the picture, especially with Luke now gone? Well, let's go back to the most divisive moment in the entire Star Wars franchise, the moment Luke Skywalker ignited his lightsaber and almost murdered his nephew in his sleep. And not to bring this all up again, but I think the biggest problem here isn't necessarily that he would briefly contemplate such drastic measures as to kill his nephew to prevent this darkness he saw from happening, as much as it was that it was almost instinctively his action, like it was the first impulse of the Jedi Master Luke Skywalker to kill his nephew in his sleep, which leaves us with the question, just what did he see in Ben's mind that was so horrible that he had this knee-jerk reaction to kill him? Well, if we go back to Return of the Jedi, Luke was able to keep his calm in his duel against Vader all the way up till the moment when Vader threatened to turn his sister, Leia of course, to the dark side. So logically here, it's very possible Luke saw such future events as Ben murdering his own father, who of course is Luke's best friend Han Solo, and maybe he even saw Ben murdering Leia, or about to kill Leia, which he was on the verge of doing in The Last Jedi. These are all potentially such horrifying things for Luke to behold that maybe, just maybe, he again had that initial reaction, that impulse to make sure that by no means would they come to pass. And as much as I personally dislike this scene and the reaction Luke had in it, I can almost begrudgingly accept that Luke seeing his sister and best friend killed by Ben would draw such a momentary response from him. However, what this of course doesn't explain, if the death of Han and maybe Leia was indeed what Luke saw in Ben's mind, is why Luke, after having such a drastic initial reaction, then decided to detach himself from the Force and do nothing about the horrible future he'd seen. Why one moment he'd be willing to kill his nephew to save Han and Leia, and then the next he wouldn't be willing to do, well, anything. And I know people will say it was all about failure, or Luke not thinking he could do anything about it, or that he thought it was all his fault in the first place. But for me, it all comes down to just what Luke saw that would make him, in one moment, be a Jedi training the next generation, and trying to save Ben from the darkness, which is why he took him on as an apprentice in the first place, according to the novelization, to the next moment Luke giving up on everything and refusing to do anything about it. What could he have possibly seen? Well, this is where we could fit Mara Jade into the equation and even give Luke a child. And again, please keep in mind, this is wild fun speculation here. Though if it did happen, it'd certainly subvert our expectations, I think. Anyway, we know that for many years after Luke defeated Vader and brought Anakin back to the light, or after the end of Return of the Jedi, if you will, Luke went searching the galaxy for more knowledge of the Force. We know during this time he didn't take on students and was even reluctant to do so, until he saw the rising darkness in Ben and decided to train him and about a dozen other students. So what if before all this happened, Luke had already decided to let the Jedi end, or to simply stop adhering so strictly to their code after he learned more about the Force during his time exploring the galaxy, a time that was highlighted in the canon novel The Legend of Luke Skywalker. Going under either of these two assumptions, what if Luke fell in love in this time period, this time before he took on Ben and the other students? What if he encountered Mara Jade, or again a character like her, a former hand of the Emperor or some other dark side inclined character, and together they saved each other from the two extremes of light and dark, and found a personal balance, shall we say. What if Luke and Mara were then living happily ever after with their child, until Luke learned about what was happening to his nephew Ben, that he was being corrupted by the darkness, and Luke, being the hero we all know and love, decided it was his responsibility to save Ben and bring the Jedi back, even though it meant Mara would leave him, or that he didn't want his child one day getting wrapped up in all this, and wanted to keep them hidden from the rest of the galaxy, even hidden and secret from his family and friends, such as Han, Leia, Ben, and so on, so he sent them away. Then, one night, after years of training and no doubt harboring some resentment towards Ben, even if he doesn't realize it or acknowledge it, Luke decides to peer into Ben's mind and see if it's been worth it, if giving up the woman he loved and his child has been worth it, only to see that Ben had been rejecting his training and would ultimately turn to the dark side. But Luke also sees something else there. He sees himself confronting Ben, in person and not as a Force projection like in The Last Jedi. And not only does he see himself being defeated by Ben, but sees Ben murder Mara Jade and his child because he somehow got them involved too. This of course would be the real reason Luke ignited his saber and briefly contemplated murdering his nephew, to prevent the future from coming to pass, to save Mara Jade and his child. He would in essence be faced with the same choice as his father Anakin was, to either betray the Jedi to potentially save the ones he loves, or risk letting them die by holding true to the Jedi ideals. And unlike his father, Luke doesn't lash out, and instead deactivates the saber and holds true to the Jedi way. But the tragedy here is it's too late, and just like Anakin's action led to the creation of Darth Vader and damned himself, Luke's inaction led to the creation of Kylo Ren, and in a sense, he damned himself too. This then gives a reason as to why Luke would choose to turn from the Jedi way and not help in the fight against Kylo and Snoke. He has seen the future and knows that if he fights, he will lose to Kylo, and it will cost him the lives of Mara and his child as well. He also detaches himself from the Force because he knows if he doesn't, he will sense the suffering of the galaxy, sense the suffering of his friends like Han and Leia, and be lured back into the fight, a fight he feels he simply cannot win. Finally, he seeks out the first Jedi Temple in search of yet more knowledge to learn if there might be, just might be, a way to save everybody. Luke, of course, does not find the answers he seeks there and instead becomes convinced the Jedi are the problem, since it was him holding to the Jedi way that caused the mess in the first place. When Rey then shows up, he sees a reflection of himself in her, of the young man he used to be. He sees an ignorant yet enthusiastic youth who has no idea what they're getting themselves into, and at first, he refuses to train her and instead tries to convince her the Jedi must end in order to prevent her from ending up like him one day. Okay, this then leaves us with the question, how would Mara Jade factor into Episode 9? Well, it's actually quite simple really. We know, or at least I hope, Rey will still need some type of instructor to teach her in the finer points of the Force, even though she has those dusty old books. This could of course be Mara Jade, who would be radically different from any type of master we've seen before. Not something like Yoda or Obi-Wan or even what we thought Luke was going to be. In other words, not some grand master Jedi who is fully committed to the light, but rather someone who never fully became a Jedi, at least not in this version, and instead had once embraced the dark side. We would then have to answer the question as to why Mara Jade would train her in the first place. Well, by answering this question, we could also do something else Episode 9 is going to need, giving the movie a plot and adding a new dynamic to the Rey and Kylo Ren story, or a way to add new tension and to give them a reason to confront each other once more, and that's by having Kylo Ren be after Luke's child in the hopes of gaining a new apprentice. Hell, this could have even been one of Kylo Ren's motives the entire time, finding Luke's child, and in particular, finding his daughter. Maybe he initially thought that child was Rey, which relates back to that line in The Force Awakens about what girl, when he's choking one of his officers after learning someone has helped BB-8 and FN-2187 escape. It also then explains that line in the novelization of The Force Awakens, which currently doesn't make any sense at all, and that's when Rey pulls the lightsaber to her right before the battle in the snow and Kylo says, "It is you." At this point, maybe he still thought she was Luke's daughter, which then explains why he doesn't kill her and offers to train her towards the end of the fight. We can even then assume that when Kylo learns she's not Luke's daughter, he will essentially accept her as a substitute because of how powerful she is, but when Rey rejects him at the end of The Last Jedi, he turns his focus back on finding the child of Luke Skywalker. And where did Kylo even learn about Luke's daughter, you may ask? Well, let's just say he somehow got that information from Darth Vader's helmet, from a remnant of the Dark Lord of the Sith that is still somehow attached to it, something the Aftermath series brought into the canon but has gone nowhere as of yet. And lastly, what is Kylo going to finish that Vader started? Well, that's simple too. Turning Luke Skywalker to the dark side, of course, or in this case, his daughter. And this is now the point of the video where I remind you, for better or worse depending on what you thought of this theory, that none of this is likely going to play out in Episode 9. However, from this fan's point of view, it could help explain Luke's actions better in The Last Jedi, add a new twist to the Skywalker saga, and end it in a way where, one day, we may yet see the adventures of a child of Luke Skywalker. It could also potentially make for a great story for Reylo fans, and give them a happy ending, depending on how it plays out. And maybe, just maybe, make for a good movie most fans would enjoy, instead of a war about it within the fanbase for months after. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of this theory. Would it work for Episode 9 or not? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.